finally decided to change my shirt. Or, my sweater. Well, I'm just wearing a shirt now, but you know what I mean. What's supposed to be day 12 of my unofficial Super Sentai is the 27th season, 2003, and that was Body Sentai Abaranger. Not much to it, so just right into the things that I liked and the things that threw me off. So we're back on the dinosaur theme after, at this point it's like 11 years later. Looking at my notes, it seems like a lot of the things that I liked and things that threw me off are really rooted in the setting and just kind of certain character arcs. So I really liked Asuka and Mahoro, their arc. They're more than just love interests, but they're on opposite sides. One's a villain, one's a ranger, and how that unfolds over the course of the season is actually pretty interesting and pretty fun to watch. And I'm trying to think, other than the albeit ironic and mostly for the sake of humor romance from the Car Ranger, I feel like you don't really see this for a long time, and I actually don't really think I've noticed it in future seasons. There are moments where, one of the Rangers will have a soft spot for one of the villains, or, there's a little bit of something going on, but it never quite went to the depth of this particular series. But I will say, when eventually I kept my journey by going back and watching Jetman, that is actually when I saw a similar story. But I had to say, from this point moving forward, I really don't notice any similar story like this, and I kind of hope they revisit this type of story arc. Another favorite character arc that I really enjoyed was Mikoto Nakadai, or Nakadai Sensei, as they'll say, who is also known as Abaranger, the White Ranger. I will say, kind of similar to when it took a while for Go Riders to join the Hurricangers. It took a really long time for Abaranger to join the main Arm Rangers and really be considered a part of the team. And I think their mechs only combined like 1 or 2 times, but it does lend itself to how epic and how cool it is when they get the chance to do that. I also noticed a few things that I guess kind of lay the foundation for future story arcs that kind of play off of the same kind of setup that Abaranger has. It actually kind of relates to my favorite episode, so I'll try to expand more on it when I get there. So just right into the things that kind of threw me off. The thing that kind of threw me off is that I didn't expect the villains and technically Asuka, the About It Black, that their setting was going to be the fact that they are from another dimension where dinosaurs never went extinct. I wonder if this in any way, maybe just the fact that they're dinosaur related, kind of inspired the ending for Power Rangers Dino Charge. Because it's like the very end of, well, technically Power Rangers Super Dino Charge. And basically, long story short, at the end of it, they end up keeping the dinosaurs from going extinct. So when they return to their timeline, dinosaurs coexist with humans. So speaking of Power Rangers, this was actually the first time that they really used that Super Sentai made an official appearance in Power Rangers, because in Power Rangers Dino Thunder, they had that one episode where they watched an episode of Super Sentai kind of depicting I guess Japan's view of the Power Rangers, and it was interesting. And getting to see that episode played out in full kind of brought me back again to when I was a kid. It took me a while to remember what episode it was, because there was only one thing I remembered, and it was that Asuka, about it black, had like stomach trouble. I'm like, oh, it's this one. And then, as I watched the episode, I slowly started to remember, okay, I remember this crazy monster. I'm like, I think I definitely remember the wig thing being a part of it, and even the money thing where they solved the issue by using piggy banks. I'm not quite sure if I remember there was like a small baseball part to it, because the episode revolved around a visiting foreigner who played baseball. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember if that part was in it or not. So kind of going back to the, how much I liked the arc between Asuka and Mahoto. It's implied in, the revelations as you go through the season, and you find out what had happened to her while they were separated and when she was brainwashed and stuff like that. It gets pretty dark, because it turns out that she was essentially abused and forced to have a child that was not hers. So you know what that means. And I was like, damn, that's pretty dark. I wonder how many kids pick up on that. Oh man, speaking of dark, it reminds me of that one episode. This isn't my favorite episode, but there was one episode that stuck out to me. They had an episode where Abaranger was I don't really remember how he got into that situation, but I think it was just out and about, and he tries to stop a man from committing suicide, which is fine, which is good. Look, Japan has high suicide rates and things like that, so I'm not surprised that they would try to incorporate their media to have these certain messages. But the way they did it, it's supposed to be digestible for kids. So, I'll get into that at the very end of this video series. But when they addressed it, I was like, first of all, dang, that's addressing the problem out there in Japan. Which is good. But then they had this one moment which is supposed to be fun and entertaining, but so after the man's failed attempt at trying to jump to his death, they find themselves in a forest because of a monster, and he tries to tie a noose, and well, first of all, the noose wasn't strong enough, so when he tried, it broke. But then they kind of but then Yoga tried to show him how to tie the knot better, but not to hang himself, but to actually use it for survival. And then at the very end of the series, or at the very end of the episode, the man, he decides to give life another chance, and they kind of poke fun at the events of the episode. And About Red's freaking out because he's at the top of the building again, but he's like, "Oh, I'm just getting my shoes." And just kind of another episode that's like, ooh, moral dilemma. If as a kid that would have went over my head. So the last thing that threw me off before, yeah, the last thing that really threw me off going into this was the fact that the mechs are sentient, not just like roar and can move on their own. They can talk. They can communicate on a one-on-one basis with the Rangers. I don't know if there's an official name for that style, but I just kind of call it the buddy system or the buddy theme. And you see this again in Abaranger. You kind of see this again in Real Soldier. I think for me, the thing that distinguishes it as a buddy kind of a buddy theme as opposed to just, the mech just being sentient and on its own is the fact that the mechs can communicate with the Rangers outside of being mechs. So for instance, when the mech or when the buddy wants to talk to the Ranger's morpher, which has the head of a dinosaur, will change to that particular dinosaur that's talking's shape and talk with the Rangers as if it's just another person on the other end of the call. And they have like personalities, and they each have like a different, and they all have different personalities. So for instance, the Brachiosaurus or Brachio, who is Opar Black's mech, he kind of resembles like the older like mentor or even like an uncle or a grandfather figure. Tyranno is he's actually similar to Abaranger Red in the sense that Tyranno had a son, and then Ryoga Abaranger Red is trying to take care of his niece. He's playing the father figure for his niece, so they actually relate on that level. And then the Triceratops or Kera he's actually really kiddish, and there's actually an episode where he takes on a human form and he looks like a kid and he's attached to his ranger, kind of like a little brother. So something else that the mechs do is whenever they talk, they end their sentences with a certain sound. Not so much a word, but a sound. Like, for instance, Brachio he ends it with Buddha, because it's supposed to be like Buragio. I guess in terms of English, it's kind of like if, when Catwoman, whenever she says perfect, she always has to, make it kind of like a cat and go perfect. So, and that's kind of the equivalent in a way. And just to kind of merge the fact that they can talk and communicate with the Rangers, like with words, and then kind of, connect it to the fact that they're beasts and they're more like buddies and they're mechs. Going into it, I knew about that, but it was pretty fun. It was interesting. And once they gathered everybody, it's not like they could have every character in every episode, but it was just kind of nice to have more characters for each of the characters to interact with. There was actually another episode that threw me off, and I didn't know what it meant until I read about it. And there's an episode where it was essentially a crossover with another Japanese show, but the Japanese show was a cartoon, and that was like a big marketing thing. And I feel like if I had known that, I would have understood it more. But that's it. So I guess just on to my favorite episode, and that was episode 48, the final Abaranger game. Spoiler alert, and this is pretty central to why this is my favorite episode, and it features Abaranger Killer's death. So going into this, because I did watch Gokaiger, I did know that Abaranger Killer died in his season. And I also just had to point out, so far, anyone with the dinosaur theme dies. Like, in Abaranger, it was Burai. In Abaranger, it was Nakadai Sensei. And, in the Gokaiger episode, the other ranger that was there was Time Fire. But guess what? His mech was a dinosaur. So technically he's dinosaur themed. And guess what? He died. And so far that proves to be true for future dinosaur themed Super Sentai moving forward. And I will point them out as I go along. So this is my favorite episode, not because Nakadai Sensei dies, but it's because now I understand why his death was such a big deal. Because as I was watching, like I said, it took a while for him to really join the team. Well, my first impression when going into this series and watching it, I thought he was always on the bad side, and then they made him have ranger powers to match the powers of the main rangers, and then at some point he has a change of heart, and it kind of goes that way, or at least the second half, because the first half it kind of starts out the same way that the other rangers got their powers, that they were just kind of randomly chosen by their mechs, and he was just doing it because he felt like it, because he was interested in it. But the reason why he eventually decided to change sides is that he realized that he was a pawn in a bigger game, that he was being used. He thought he was doing everything on his own. He thought, and apparently this goes deep, when he was a kid, because the reason why he's a doctor at such a young age is because he was a genius. But it turns out that's because the Evolians, the villain group, kind of got a hold of him and kind of bred him to be this super genius, and he thought that was all him. But for that to be part of a different, someone else's plan and feeling used, that hurt him, and that's when he decided to fight back against the villain group. The Rangers also, eventually figured out and put it together, and either he tells them or they're there during the big reveal, and he wants to kind of take his life back. So he revolts against the villain group, the Volians. Even in that part, when he knows everything and he's fighting back, he still technically hasn't joined the team. They may have used the mechs once, but that was a one-off thing at that point. But then when they do it again, and he makes one final stand because the villains are trying to do their final plan and take over the world and stuff. So he fights back as best as he can, and he stops the whole operation from happening. But he gets fatally wounded in the process. Which, by the way, when it shows him bleeding out, that is a lot of blood. That, even though the blood is fake, and I don't think I've ever seen that much blood, on us, in Super Sentai. I mean, they'll have a scratch here, bloody nose, bloody lip here and there, maybe a little less than a gash, but from the looks of it, it seems like he got something lodged in, and it was just bleeding out. And for one thing, bleeding out is a pretty sucky way to go. Well, technically, he exploded because, I'm trying to remember. I think part of the plan was to something happens where he essentially becomes an explosive, because I think the villains were tampering with him, or that was what they needed him for the final plot. But then he escapes, but he's still gonna explode, and his mech Top Galer takes him, and they kind of have one last bonding moment as he bleeds out and faints and he explodes. And that was like pretty heartfelt, admittedly, because that was the first time he finally referred to him by his first name as opposed to just always calling him human. After watching the season and watching the episode, and I finally kind of started to understand why he is kind of a fan favorite, even though he was kind of a villain for most of it. I think the sad thing about it was how tragic it was, because I think at this point he had technically just started joining the team. Everybody considered him a part of the team because they wouldn't be sad and angry at his death if they didn't feel that connection with him. He just started to connect with people and be a part of the team. So the whole arc with him being a pawn in a larger villain's game, and him realizing that he wasn't living his own life and that he was just a pawn. You actually see this again in Abaranger with Video and Long, but I'll get to that when I get to that season, and I'll talk about it again. So following my 2 seasons a month plan, I would have to be watching Abaranger at the second half of June. And what also released in June was Netflix's Neon Genesis Evangelion, one of my personal favorite animes. Neon Genesis Evangelion covers a lot of things about depression and connecting with people. And you kind of see certain traits of Shinji and his father and their inability to really, truly, deeply connect with people. You kind of see that a little bit in Nakadai Sensei. And, the feeling that you can live a life, and, the theme of Dino Guts, it had a similar feel. Or maybe I'm just projecting it. I'm probably projecting it, but, it was definitely an interesting pairing to have.